So this is St. Peter's Church in Great Livermere. I bought that little painting for £1.50 from inside the church. We'll see that later. There's a few interesting features here right off the bat. Firstly, you've got a massive Suffolk sky. A lot of clouds up there, a lot of blue. Then you also got a thatched roof, which you do see, but you don't see too often. And then you've got terracotta tiles on the other one. And then finally you got the tower, which looks like it either fell down or it just wasn't finished, and they just sort of put a shed on top when they got halfway. So there's a bit of a backstory to this one. I was meant to go to Troston Church, which is a story in itself, but essentially it said on the website it was open, it said on the signs outside it was open, but when I actually got there, I went through the gate, I went through the porch, and I got to the actual door of the church, and it was locked. There was an old couple outside who were just leaving, and they were sort of putting the chain up on the gate, so I stopped them. I was like, no, I want to go in, can you let me in? And they just looked at me weird, saying, well, I think it's open, mate, and just pointed to this massive sign saying church open. So with that confidence, I went in there, but the door wasn't budging. It was, an ancient door with the kind of ones I like, 800, 700 years old, a solid thing rocking on its hinges, and it wouldn't move. But there was a sign in the porch saying, talk to these guys at the local pub if you want to get in. So I called up, they didn't answer. This was still quite early, it was before 11 o'clock. I went to the pub, they weren't there, and it's a good one, the Bull in Troston. They make all their own beers. So eventually I just gave up, but then on the way home, I found this place. I just saw a sign for a church. Main problem is though, it means I haven't done any research. If you look at the right now, there's a gravestone there for a guy who we'll encounter later. It's about 300 years old, he worked for the king, I think he was a local lad. He was buried in the churchyard, but because I didn't know I was coming here, I hadn't done any research. For the Troston Church, there's loads of good stuff to see, and I'd spent the night before making notes and making a list of things to look for and look at. Whereas here, I'm just going in blind basically. I'm like, well, what's this little squiggly S thing up here? Could be good. I don't know what it is. So yeah, I was sort of going in blind here. I just filmed everything I could find. And you can probably see that I've got a half hour's video out of it, so there must be something worth looking at. And there was. I was really pleasantly surprised. As I often am when I go into a random church, there's always something worth seeing. And it's kind of nice when you haven't planned it too, because I go to the Troston one and I would have expected to see everything that I find. It's notable for graffiti, and I guess we'll see it at some point later. Whereas here, spoiler, there is some graffiti. I wasn't expecting that. But here's a porch. You can't actually get in it through the front door, so we'll see that later. That's a little sneak peek. And this generally is just a sneak peek of the exterior. We'll see it in a bit more detail later. But you can see there's something to look forward to already. There's some lovely decorated tracery there in the windows. This is the nave we're looking at. You can see that big old thatched roof. And for some reason they've plastered the outside. I don't know what's underneath. I'm guessing there'll be flint because it's an old building. It was built in the chancel was built in the 13th century, so it is ancient. It's really old. And then the nave was added on. They tend to be 100 years later or so. But here we go. We're going inside now, and I couldn't help but spending a bit of time lingering, filming this ballsack door knocker. There it is. I've been practicing some video editing techniques for this one, so there's the doorway opening transition there. I've only got the basic version of iMovie, so it's all a bit schoolboy, but make do. There's a pointed archway here, which means it's a little bit younger than another one we see later on, which is rounded. And we did spend some time looking at the floor just briefly, but this floor doesn't offer much of interest at all. It's not got modern Victorian tiles, well, renovated Victorian tiles. So here we are, we're inside the porch now. We've just seen an arch-braced roof. It's got stone seats to either side, which they often do. And these tall perpendicular style windows, you see what that is like? Perpendicular, it's just mostly straight lines, maybe a bit of faffery with some leaf shapes. But it's nothing like the reticulated, decorated stuff we see coming up later on. A big chunky old door, and there was just a sign there with all about the declaration of the rights of the church, I think, or the parish, bit of an income, bit of land. It's the kind of thing they used to occupy themselves with back in the day. See, look, bit of a boring floor. But that also means that your church isn't quite as renovated as some of the others are, so this retains a lot of its original charms, which is also true of Troston, because that one was renovated, but the guy was a bit of a purist and just an architectural enthusiast. But anyway, we'll see that at a later point. So here we go, looking down the nave in the eastwards direction, up to the chancel at the end there. That's a treat yet to come, but there's plenty more to look at before we get that far. You can see there's a screen there, there's some interesting windows, there's a complex roof. So that's all interesting stuff waiting to be seen. And now, if you'll excuse the rough cut, we'll turn around and look at the tower, or the inside of the tower, and the font. The font is 14th century, with just a plain octagonal shaft, but then some interesting features around the sides. What I found interesting was how a lot of the patterns around the font mirror some of the patterns you see in the tracery and carved around the rest of the church. So you've got a bit of a leaf design there, which obviously we see in the windows. There again is a leaf design in that perpendicular style with the shapes which we mentioned earlier. Again, there's a reticulated style. This one in the middle, I don't know what that's about, just sort of 4-leaf clovers. This one too, that's kind of, you will see that kind of pattern in window tracery. And this one, this little triple spur thing, that's kind of like a Celtic style. I don't think you see that anywhere in the church. I tried to have a little look inside. You can see a bit there, but I don't think there's too much to see anyway, apart from maybe some spiders. And then I saw this. I was wondering what the hell this is. Just a big stick on top. Then I noticed there's a chunk out of it. I turned around to film the organ, and I found this wooden stick. I was like, hang on a minute. There's a chunk out of this stick. There's a chunk out of that stick. Let's try and make 2 sticks. And there we go. Sort of summons Jesus. I was happy with that. It's good that they left it to the side. Maybe they just get it out for christenings, just to sort of keep the holy power in. Only to be used at special occasions. And look, after this, I summoned Jesus. And there was this little soul flapping about. Now, usually, I'd try and open a window to let a bug out. But these windows, they're like 700 years old. I think the one on the left, to be fair, does open, but I couldn't open it. And so it just meant that butterfly was flapping about the whole way through the church because it was dead quiet and I could just hear it sort of death rattle, judging me. But this is the guy, right, who was in that grave outside. So it says a bit about who he is there. William Sakings, or Sakings. He was the chief falconer, or just the falconer, to Charles I, Charles II, and James II. And he lived to be 78. Which is, good going for those days. I mean, that was before they had healthcare and stuff. But it just goes to show that, life exercising, outdoors, playing with animals, it's good for you. And then there's these bronzes here, which have been removed and replaced with pictures on paper. And I think this one on the right, look, it looks a bit like handsome Squidward. I told you I've been doing the video editing. That Jesus appeared earlier, that wasn't me, that was the power of the cross, but yeah, I put that transparent Squidward there. So I think these bronzes, it didn't say where they actually were other than that they were in Great Livermere Church. And I think I found a spot on the floor where they might have used to have been. We'll see that later. And I really like this. See, I wanted to go to Troston to see some graffiti, but then I ended up just finding this other graffiti here instead. The advantage of the Troston one is you've got an idea how old it is because people have studied it, but I couldn't find anything on this. It's like a guy in breeches and old school shoes smoking a pipe. And I don't know whether the face and the mouth were there first, because they're weirdly deep for some reason that you can see now. But someone's just drawn a man around them. I thought that was pretty cool. I'm hoping it's hundreds of years old. It's just some little boy from like the 1700s. There's a few other ones here as well. You can't see them quite so well, but a couple of them are 100 years old. That guy there, look, just at the end of the war. That's real nice. I like that bit of personality. It's that sort of history that makes churches come alive. That's why I love them. This side's a bit more plain. So then we look up into the inner sanctum of the tower. There's not too much of an interest. You can't actually get past that door. But the window tracery, which probably looks better from the outside, to be honest, is quite nice. That ladder looks ancient. This door, I'm going to guess that's sort of Victorian. It looks relatively modern. But I liked the patterns there. Which this time, they sort of mirror the ones which we'll see later at the altar and in the altar rails. And there's this as well, Anne, the wife of, I don't know what that says actually, Dennis. 300 years old, 250. And there's this little bit here, it's not really that interesting, but I'll pause it there so you can have a little look. And then we move on. You know what's coming now, you can see it in the background. It's the grating. The floor's not too interesting, but it's got some interesting grating. And it sort of looks a bit like the pattern on the door. I don't know if that's intentional or not, but yeah, anyway, this is what's really in the background. An organ, which according to, I think Wikipedia, yeah, Wikipedia says it's one of the finest examples in a local area. But I don't know, I've seen better. Those pipes are really nice, but they're just painted on. But I don't know who posted that on Wikipedia. I might go back and edit it. Maybe they're talking about the sound or something, like it's just a really good quality organ. I wouldn't know that, but in terms of just the appearance, it's not that hot. However, I think we're about to look at it. Oh no, wait, we're looking at all the stops first. So these, I don't know, these do something. Corner peon, libluk gedakt. Standard sort of little things. But this, I really like this. A kind of a shell design lampshade, Art Nouveau style. They don't make them like that anymore. I think it covers a light bulb that illuminates the pedals below. Or in case the organ player drops his AirPod or something. I'm waiting for that kind of style to be revived. We've got maximalism back. We've got design coming back. We're past the whole minimalism thing. And look, people are going to start using interesting fonts like the one here on this poster. It's hard to place this because it could just be a parody based on the old style, or it could be sort of, I don't know, post-war 50s. Now this is interesting. This is really interesting. This is like a 13th century painting, probably original. Obviously it's massively faded now, but they reckon it's the story of the three kings and the three dead, which also appears in a similar form in Kentford Church, which we were supposed to visit a while ago, but I got lost on the way there and ended up in Tuddenham, the second best church in Tuddenham. But basically it's a story about three kings that go out, they find three sort of like zombies, and they're moralised by it. And from the moment of meeting their death, they decide to live their lives in a more fulfilling manner, a greater regard to their soul and sanctity in heaven rather than material goods. Now this, I didn't know what it was at the time, but I thought, it's old, it's cool, it deserves to be filmed. Went home, couldn't find anything about it in my books, but then just having a look around online, I thought it might be a market cart, they put their produce on it, take it to market and flog some apples. But no, it's a coffin cart. So rather than like fun apples and potatoes and sugar beet, they were shifting dead bodies around on it. Because you can actually see the rollers, if you go back, you can see some of them, I think, roll to allow the coffin to be pushed off easily. Anyway, this is the butterfly's window. It's a pretty similar design across the whole church. Well, at least in the nave, which is this main area we're looking at now. It's a nice example of decorated tracery. But there's plenty more where that came from, so we'll be able to appreciate it again later on. Here's a little niche. Don't really know why this is here. The books seems to suggest that these are maybe the old windows. I don't know why they'd be so low down. And this is, another painted bit of the wall, original feature. This is a consecration cross, which basically is like smashing a bottle of champagne onto a boat, but in a holy way. So it's like this church is now pure and it's consecrated. And according to the Gospel of St. Thomas, it means it imprints an indelible mark on the building by reason of which it may never be transferred to common or profane uses. That's what he said in his Gospel. And I'm kind of thinking, well, I'm here. I mentioned ball sacks earlier, and I'm entirely common. So sorry about that, Thomas. And we just missed another window, but now we're looking at this plaque here. Now, people might remember from the Gipping tour, we had the Arundel family, who appeared because they married some of the Tyrrells, who built Gipping Chapel. And there they are again, so obviously it's a big family in the local area, a lot of money, passed down the generations. And I really like this skull. It's, much more true to life, or rather true to death, I guess, than they usually see. It just looked like a proper skull for someone to wax it in there. And that's another consecration cross there. That one's obviously less faded, greater detail. I think it's interesting that they didn't cover it up. I don't think they did it with view to sort of preserving the pattern. They did it because obviously it's a holy symbol. It's following the old Gospel of St. Thomas. So this bit here is another interesting feature. This little tiny niche is weird. No one really knows why it's there. It's got a hole in the top. I reckon it might have used to be an old window, because you had thin windows back in the days. But we're not really sure. To the left there's a normal piscina with the design on top. And here's another wall painting here. I mean, clearly it's not much of a painting anymore. It's kind of... That's my hand there trying to get rid of that light. You can see it in better detail, but it didn't work. It just messed up the focus and revealed my hand to the world. But this helpful thing gives an example of what was meant to be seen on the painting. It's the risen Lord with the sleeping soldiers. But even then, I mean, I don't know when that was made, but they haven't got much of an idea of what the painting originally looked like. And this made me laugh as well. Reserved for Beryl. What does Beryl want with that space, and what's she going to do there? Maybe Beryl, I don't know, it's like the church hamster. This is always features in the books. The pulpit, a triple decker pulpit. I mean, you don't see those very often. So you got the priest goes up top. He's got a clerk or something writing stuff, or passing in the right psalms. Sitting down below, but it's got some really lovely carvery. I think this is 17th century. Yeah, 17th century, and acanthus, I think these plant bits are called. So I went up, had a look, just addressing the congregation. Second look at that organ to see what Wikipedia was talking about. Still couldn't see it. Get a decent look at the ceiling here, plastered. It looks though as if the nave was built in two separate sections, perhaps because not only are there the old windows there, we're just seeing the little windows, and one here. You can see at the top there that there was different beams on the left-hand side. This is quite interesting. That blue colour isn't like mould or anything, or moss. It's original, so they would have decorated it. Well, I don't know if it's original, but it would have been decorated at some point a long time ago. And here we go, finally we're actually looking at the window. So there you go, sort of reticulated, decorated tracery in the general perpendicular style with the pointed arch and those long columns down. And there's another consecration cross too. But here we go, the moment we've all been waiting for. Looking up to the chancel with this impressive screen. And screens used to be a common feature in churches, but for various reasons they disappear. So one of them, as you can see here, this one on the right hand side is rotting away. It's been eaten by some sort of worm or something. But another reason is, like in the Reformation or whatever, they got rid of them, or they smashed them up, because they're quite delicate little things. But the purpose of the screen was to separate the priest from the dirty common lay folk. the illiterate peasantry. This was especially true when you had the more Catholic process with the bread and the wine and body and blood of Christ. You needed that separation there to, separate Christ away. This is some original paintwork. They call it diaper decorations in the book. Diaper decorations in the books. There's plenty of lovely little coloured decorations. You can see in the spandrels, which are the kind of the bits in the corners, the top corners. They've got different patterns. But that wood is a right state, especially because it's all carved. It really does suffer when the worms come along and start chowing down. It's beautiful. With the OGs and crocketed style. But I think this is interesting that on the priest side, the one where they actually have the body and the blood, it's not decorated. Which really, I kind of think that says it all. It's more important to project the image. And we're looking at the floor again. Again, there's an interesting floor here, but it's all hidden away under seating and wood. But more importantly, I guess we look to this eastern window. And this is the most impressive bit of tracery. Just a classic example of the decorated style. Nothing too fancy, but interesting and intricate nonetheless. And then we look up to the roof slowly. In my blue book it says that the chancel roof is arch braced with king posts. The king posts are those bits there you can see the triangles going across right at the top. And the very deep wall plates, which are the bits we're looking at now, are finely pierced with tracery. And they really are. They're lovely. Like each one is unique. Kind of like the spandrels we saw earlier in the screen. And it really does repay looking at every single layer. There's a few layers there. It usually looks like the middle layer, the top layer, the bottom layer. Kind of like a sandwich style. With the filling of the sandwich being these really interesting patterns. Some are a bit more geometric, some are a bit more flowery. But they're all nice. That's another bit of original painting there. I mean, obviously this would have been spread across more widely, so it would have, maybe gone around the whole of the chancel, maybe even around the whole of the church. But there would have been much more colour generally around the place. And you can see that in that blue bit we saw above the window just before. This guy here, he was a ghost story writer. This guy here, something to do with the war. I guess you got to pay your respect to the war guys. And this is the door. This is the entrance door, so the one with the ball sack on the other side. Some interesting patterns here on the metal. And a strange shape. I thought it looked a bit like a chicken's head or a rooster, turkey, whatever. Or maybe a hand. Another consecration cross. So yeah, this side is holy too. I don't know what this is all about. It's all Latin. So I don't know. And here, these windows here, they've got a bit more colour in. A few little yellow bits and blue bits. But you can see they're much more simple, and that speaks to the fact that obviously the chancel was the older part of the church. There's a simple perpendicular, without all the fancy leaves and flowers up top. So while we're looking at all of this stuff, this was the weekend the Queen died, so rest in peace, Queenie. There's a bunch of stuff there. You can't really read these things, so it's a good time to talk about the rails. It's a nice Georgian set with turned and carved delicate spiral balusters and Corinthian capitals to the corner shafts. And the book says it's notable for a few reasons. One is that this bit here, the rurados, mirrors the railings with the twisty bit. And so does the altar table, which we just saw in part, but it's mostly covered with flags and tablecloths. These nice piscinas, niches on either side, left and right. And on the right-hand side, it looks as if there was another painting above that little niche there. Probably, I'm guessing it looks like a coat of arms, a shield, for someone whose dedication was within that thing, maybe Beryl. Another small window, which just again speaks to the age of the chancel. A little less sophisticated in their building techniques, smaller windows, less stone masonry. But they did do a good bit of carving. So this is bench, as you see here, from 1601. So compared to the actual building itself, is much more modern. But feeling that, it's got some real history behind it. As I say, always that wood sort of turned to rock with all the hands and the sweat and acid and grease and stuff. And here we go. This is where I think these bronzes might have been. See? Handsome Squidward fits right in. I'm not sure if they would have been. I'm not sure whether they really fit. But it seems to make sense that they'd be there. And it also makes sense that you'd take them out because people are standing on it. And I thought this was quite a good shot. Sort of framed by the screen. The rood screen. But that's pretty much it for the chancel, I think. And for the interior of the church, I guess. Yeah, there we go. We're outside now, looking at that tower. So up top it's got a weather-boarded belfry. The tower was built in the early 14th century. And as I said right at the beginning of the video, some of my books reckon that either it just wasn't finished or it broke up top and just collapsed and never bothered to replace it, so they just chucked a shed on top. Because there's another church nearby in Little Livermere. This is Great Livermere, with a taller tower. I think it's a ruin now. I didn't actually see it, but so they obviously had the expertise and the skills within the local area to build towers, and we know that from the fact we've seen loads of taller towers everywhere. Like Troston Church, for example, has a taller tower. So this one, I don't know what they were doing, but it sort of fits. Here's that big Suffolk sky again. And I reckon this is probably some of the land that we saw was granted to the church earlier on that fiefdom they were talking about. There's a little squirrel there, did you see that? On the right hand side. I saw him at the time running away into the bush. It was a really nice day, as you can see, like the sun's in the sky. It's a bit of a breeze. Nice and cool, not too hot, like some of the other trips I've been on recently. And I got really lucky with this shot, just the way the sun sort of glows from the background of that shed up top. According to the Blue Book, there's some really nice bells in that tower. I didn't hear them, and I certainly didn't see them. But it looks like the kind of place you'd put a few good bells. But after that, we'll just continue walking through the churchyard. So we did actually see on the other side of the tower that window I was talking about earlier. It's quite nice. It's a similar style to the rest of them, decorated tracery. And this blocked doorway here, this is a different style to the rest of them. It's got a rounded arch on top, which means it's older. It's from about the 1200s. So whereas all the windows we've been looking at and all the doorways have had pointed arches, this one's a rounded one, which you tend to see in Norman churches, like really old ones. And it's interesting because it was these pointed arches which allowed for churches to become taller and to usher in the perpendicular style which we see in so many of these Suffolk churches. The pointed style meant that they could basically make bigger holes in the walls because it distributed the weight differently. So rather than going all around the arch and putting the weight on top, it sort of forces it downwards and outwards in some cases, which is why they have those buttresses, which we just see on the left-hand side there. So basically that allowed them to create the perpendicular style which we've seen in so many of these churches and which we've seen a lot of today, which is quite cool. This is the vestry, a heavy flint building which probably is the same style as the rest of the church before it was plastered over. So this is what it could have looked like, rather than the grey sort of car park look it's got at the moment. But I couldn't get into this, the door was locked, so who knows what's in there. Probably the priest sleeping. And there it is. This is the eastern side where we just looked at, with the rails and the reredos and the screen. Again, decorated tracery, perpendicular, a bit of a pointed arch. And I always think you only really get a proper sense of the age of the windows from the outside. For some reason, you just get a better look at the stone and the style. But that's it. Now I'm walking carefully through the graveyard to avoid disturbing the spirits. And we just do a final examination of the thatched roof. Don't get too used to seeing those because you don't see a lot of them. And also the belfry up top, made of weatherboarded wood. And there it is. So this was an accidental find. I was meant to go to Troston, and we're definitely going to Troston at some point later. But as far as accidental church tours go, this was a good one. Had some interesting features, some nice tracery, a good screen as well. Wasn't expecting to see that. You've got that falconer guy there right by the water butt and the porch, and also just quickly you can see the old style fin window, which has been blocked up on the sort of in the centre of the chancel there, on the left hand side of the larger window. So there's always evolving, these churches, even though they're 700, 800 years old. And that's it really. See ya.